The last topic that we're going to cover in section 14.1 deals with periodic graphs and phase shifts. Now in the last video lesson on vertical shifts, I did talk about phase shifts just briefly, but this video will now show you how to use them to graph. Recall, the general form of all periodic equations is either y equals a sine b theta minus h plus k, or the same equation with cosine in it. And if you recall from the last video, if I do a little color coding, A is the amplitude. Sorry, it's off a little bit. A is the amplitude. B is the frequency. Smartboard's off just slightly. But K on the last video was the vertical shift. And what this video is going to talk about and help you graph is the H value. The H value is called the phase shift, which is the same as the horizontal shift, and it works just like everything that we have covered so far this year as far as transforming equations. If it's negative H, the graph moves to the right, and if it's plus H, the graph moves to the left. So don't forget that. Now if you need to pause the video, please do, but that's the only notes that I'm giving you, and I'm just going to do one example to help you graph. All right, here we go. Hopefully you've got a sheet of graph paper, or you can draw this out. But what we're going to do is we're going to graph two cycles of this equation right here. All right, so here we go. When you graph, the first thing you need to do is list the 7 key pieces of information, which is what I've written in red. All right, here we go. The amplitude is the A value, which is 5. The frequency is the B value, which is pi divided by 3. The period is 2 pi over the B value, which is pi divided by 3, which is the same as 2 pi times that fraction flipped over. Now, if you times them, the pi's will cancel out, and 2 times 3 is equal to 6. Therefore, our period here is 6. I'm going to erase that and continue on. The vertical shift is the K value. That's also the midline of the graph. 12, the vertical shift. The maximum, if you recall, K plus A equals the max. 12 plus 5, the max is 17. K minus A is the minimum. 12 minus 5 is 7. And I got to always tell you the phase shift, people, whether it's a graph, an equation, or a word problem, I got to tell you that. The phase shift is 4. Remember, the negative sign is already built in. The phase shift is a positive 4, so that means we're going to go to the right with this graph. All right. Now I'm going to do a little bit of erasing again and get ready to go. Okay. Now, how do you graph? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to number our number line. The y values, there's only 3 numbers that you use for y. It's those 3 that I put in the blue box. So I don't care how you number your number line. It really doesn't matter, just as long as I see those 3 key numbers. So I'm just going to put 7 there, and I'm going to put, maybe I'll go a little higher here, and I'm going to put 17 right there. And the midline is 12. 12 is obviously right in the middle. That's where that dotted line is. That's going to be the middle of your graph. Those are the only numbers that I need on my y-axis. Obviously, where your 2 hash marks or your 2 axes cross right here, that's going to be 0, 0. Okay? Now the x-axis. Well, it says the period is 6. So therefore, I really just got to count up by ones. There's no pi involved, people. There's no pi. It's just a number, 6. And it says graph 2 cycles. So I probably better go out a ways and let's see, how many lines do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know what? We could probably just use those lines. I'm just going to add on. So let's just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm just going to go out to 16 for reasons which you will see here in just a bit. If the board works here for me, going out a little ways. It's tough to write at the very end of the board here. So maybe what I'm going to do is this. The end of the board's not working real well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put little hash marks in here. So I can number these 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Okay. Now, you'll see in just a second why I went up to 16, but you got to plan ahead. All right, so now I got a graph. Well, the first thing I notice is I'm graphing sine. Well, let's think about the original sine graph that we did in class. If you recall, the original sine graph starts at 0, and then at pi over 2, it's at its maximum. At pi, it's back to 0. And then at 3 pi over 2, it's down at the minimum. And then at 2 pi, it's back to 0. I'm just going to sketch this roughly. And the reason I'm sketching it is because where does sine always start? Sine always starts on that midline between the maximum and the minimum. Sine starts in the middle. All right, so that means my first dot here for this graph has to be on 12. But where? And that's where this phase shift fits in. The whole graph is moved over 4. So it's like I'm taking this starting point and I'm moving it that direction 4 units. So if my starting spot was normally right here at 0, 0, it's now going to be over at 4, but then the vertical shift puts it up at 12. So my first dot is going to be at 4, 12. All right, so I hope that makes sense to you. If not, please ask me during class. The period is 6. That means 6 units from 4, the graph will end. 1 cycle. That's why at 10, that's where the graph will end. Now, in the sine function, here's the beginning of the cycle. Here's the end of the cycle. The middle, the dead middle, is also on that midline. Well, what's the middle of 4 and 10? Well, that answer is 7. So at 7, I'm also going to be right in the middle on that midline. Follow the pattern, people. Follow the pattern. Okay, now, where is the graph between the first 2 dots on the midline? Well, halfway in between, it's at the maximum, as long as the 5 is positive. So that means, what is halfway between 4 and 7? Well, that would be 5.5, which is about right there. At 5.5, I'm at the maximum. Well, you guys told me the maximum was 17. And finally, between this dot right here and this dot right here, where is the graph? Well, it's down at the minimum. Okay, well, what is halfway between 7 and 10? Well, that would be 8.5, which is about right there. And at 8.5, the graph is at its minimum, which is down here at about 7. Hope that looks like it's at 7. And there's your first cycle of this graph, people. Now, we should always connect it to the y-axis, this line right here. We should always connect it. So let's talk about the distance between any 2 dots. Our first dot is at 4. Our second dot is at 5.5. So the distance between those 2 dots is 1.5. So if I work backwards, my next minimum value would be at 2.5, which is about right there. That will be my next minimum value. So the graph is going to go down to here. I'm going to erase this a little bit. It wasn't quite accurate. Okay, and then the next point would be at 1. 1.5 units later, it's going to be coming back up. It's going to be on the midline. So we're going to come back up there. And then just before 17, because it's not quite 1.5 units, it will touch the y-axis. Now let's go the other way. It says 2 cycles. Our first cycle goes from here to there. Now let's go again. Let's follow the pattern. 1.5 units from 10 would be 11.5. That's where the next maximum would occur. 11.5. What's 1.5 units from 11.5? Well, that would be 13. That's right there. That's where it will be back on the midline again. 1.5 units from there should be 14 and a half. It'll be down at the minimum value right there. 1.5 units from there would be at 16, which we should be back on the midline again. Oops, and you know what? I'm going to draw this as a dotted line so you can see the second cycle. It's going to look something like that. Obviously, each cycle has a period of 6. So from 4 to 10 is the first cycle, from right here to right there. The second cycle goes from 10 to 16, right here to right there. And you can see the 2 complete cycles. And people, that's how you graph using phase shift. The phase shift slides the graph either left or right, that many units, and that's where your cycle will begin. Just like our cycle right there that I'm circling in blue, that's where our graph started at 412. If you got further questions, please ask me during class.